My presentation for the social emotional component of this course will focus on the power of the like. A collaborative study was done between the University of California and California State University. Researchers wanted to examine the influence that occurs online through social media. They wanted to look at how the like is a quantitative social endorsement, and they wanted to investigate if there were any neural correlates of viewing photos with many or few likes to assess the role of quantifiable social endorsement in peer influence. Researchers proposed the following hypothesis. Participants would like photos that had higher likes, neural responses to popular and unpopular photos would differ, and viewing other people's photos with greater number of likes would elicit greater nucleus accumbens, or the NAC activation. And the NAC is a hub inside the brain that is primarily activated and entices reward, the feeling of reward within the individual. Researchers had 32 developing adolescents, 18 females, 14 males aged 13 to 18. Subjects would submit their own Instagram photos, which were then put into a mainframe system that students or that the adolescents would interface with, and it would mimic the Instagram system. Participants were told that there were 50 other adolescents that were participating in this study, and that would allow participants to think about how many people would be part of their viewing audience. It was deemed that photos that received 23 or more likes were deemed as popular, and photos that were unpopular received 22 or less likes. Participants would view 148 photos. 42 photos would be risky, depicting alcohol, drug use, smoking, and other risky behaviors. Neutral would include 66 photos depicting friends, food, and possessions, and all participants were allowed to submit 40 of their own personal photos. And during this time, while viewing these photos, they were connected to a functional MRI that would scan their brain for different types of activity. And the neutral photos with many likes showed significantly greater activity in the visual cortex. So the researchers thought that photos that had more likes, people were actually spending more time looking at those photos as opposed to photos that had less likes. So people weren't spending as much time looking at them. Risky photos showed activity in the frontal cortex and the precentral gyrus through the middle gyrus. Photos with many likes caused increased activation in the NAC, putamen, and thalamus, which are regions that are sensitive to reward, learning, motivation, and cognition. Very interesting results from the functional MRI showed that viewing risky and neutral images, there was less activation in neural regions responsible for cognitive control and response inhibition. So this could point towards the acceptance of risky behaviors amongst participants. The NAC was more active with neutral images with many likes in comparison to neutral photos with few likes. So there was a greater reward potentially with liking a photo that had a greater number of likes already. And the NAC was also very active when participants viewed their own photos despite the number of likes. This could indicate a sense of reward or confidence when participants would see their photos being shown in a public domain. And in conclusion, quantifiable social endorsement is a significant example of sociocultural learning. Adolescents are trying to make a sense of their own social world, and if you really think about it, Facebook has not had a like button for very long. The like button has been around for around 5 or 6 years, but it has had a very significant role in how adolescents are perceiving the world around them. Behaviors, whether they're positive or negative, are being modeled and emulated through these social media platforms. And these types of behaviors could be reinforced through the provision of likes because if a person receives a lot of likes for a particular behavior, they will continue to do that if they're because studies have shown that their reward centers are actually being stimulated by their own photos receiving a high number of likes, whether the behavior is positive or negative. And unlike offline forms of peer influence, receiving likes within Facebook or Snapchat would be completely quantitative. You're not getting a lot of feedback regarding a particular action. You're just basing the acceptance of a particular action or a photo based on the number of likes that you receive. Some recommendations and discussions that the authors had regarding the study include viewing photos online does not constitute risk. However, results show that peer influence decreases activities in mechanisms of the brain that are responsible for cognitive control, particularly in risky scenarios, and this could increase the likelihood of engaging in risky behavior. Future research should examine if this process occurs in adults, and future research should also investigate whether the NAC response is particularly heightened in adolescents, particularly because adolescents are still going through significant psychological and behavioral development. So they want to see if those regions of the brain are even more active than in comparison to younger years or older individuals. And some strengths and limitations of the study is that it was a relatively small group with only 32 participants. There was no direct comparison between in-person and online peer influence, but it is one of the first studies to measure neurological and behavioral response to a quantifiable social endorsement. And researchers did use a functional MRI to measure changes in brain activity, and were able to receive fairly accurate results while the participants were looking at photos while using a familiar social platform. Some mediators and moderators. Some personal perceptions of social media, personal usage of social media, and personal perceptions of risk-taking could all affect the way that the results were panning out in this study. And some mediators, some differences in neurological conditions between subjects, individual self-esteem, and differences between genders should probably be investigated because the neurological conditions between the genders, between males and females, could play a role in how results are panning out in this study. And I would like to see more studies done to determine how social media is starting to play a role, especially with peer influence. And I would like to see this particularly in earlier years, because I know that with my students, I have some students 8, 9 years old that have Facebook accounts. So I would like to see what some of the results of these studies are, to see how it's affecting the neurological and behavioral development of students. And here is my reference. Thank you very much.